Alrighty. Perfection.
If you look very, very closely, and maybe you'll even have to pause the video, but the keen eye out there will be able to detect that these two images are not, in fact, identical, but are in reality the same game running on two different gaming PCs, but at slightly different settings. I will award 500 internet points to anyone in the comments who can correctly guess which one of these is the high-performance gaming PC capable of running this game at 4K, and which one of these is the handheld gaming PC released in mid-2023. Now then, now I've exhausted the South Pacific's entire supply of industrial-strength sarcasm, let's have a chat about this game's now notorious performance struggles and just what it takes to get it up to playable on the potato end of the compute spectrum. Hello again, I am Blanty, and just before I slumped into my bed last night, Capcom publicly confirmed that despite all the loud thrashing and spectacularly internety tantrums being thrown about performance issues and bugs and crashes, that the sales of Monster Hunter Wilds are, literally, record-breaking. Record obliterating might perhaps be the most appropriate wording, in fact. They've announced that the game has sold 8 million copies across PC, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X and S. And all of that in just 3 days, merely the opening weekend. This makes Monster Hunter Wilds Capcom's fastest-selling title ever, by a huge margin. Even though its user review rating on Steam still sits at mixed, although that is slowly trending positive, I've noticed. And most of those negative reviews are not about the game itself, but either about the performance or, surprisingly, a bunch of people who can't figure out how multiplayer works for some reason. I mean, sure, it's a little bit more awkward than many games make it, but come on. Either way, 8 million sales in 3 days is the quickest a Monster Hunter game has reached that figure. And if we're talking just the opening 3 days, Monster Hunter World was considered a smash hit with 5 million sales within the same period. And Monster Hunter Rise, which didn't even have the benefit of a multi-platform launch, and was of course initially exclusive to the Nintendo Switch, hit 4 million sales in its opening weekend. Across its lifetime, World has sold, at least so far, about 21 million copies, and Rise 16 million. So it's probably more than likely that Monster Hunter Wilds will become Capcom's new best-selling game of all time across their entire stable of IPs, replacing World at the top spot. The only question is how quickly it's going to do that. But yes, elephant in the room. This success comes despite the loud rumblings about just how hard it is to run at high settings compared to the general performance expectations of other AAA games. Rigs that can max out the likes of Cyberpunk 2077 are having to make setting sacrifices to get Wilds humping along at desirable frame rates. And I don't think too many people are going to argue that Cyberpunk is a worse looking game. And Cyberpunk is a true open world game, while Wilds is not. But all of this is without mentioning the stability issues, which are the biggest issue for me, personally. I mean, seriously, yes, the game is hard to run, but all you have to do is make some setting sacrifices and sort of fiddle and balance, that sort of stuff, and you'll get to a playable frame rate. The big issue is having that playable game crash on you repeatedly. That kind of stops the fun, no matter what your game looks like. Capcom have already released 2 separate bug-fixing patches already. Neither update, though, has specifically addressed performance or crashing issues, but instead have focused on addressing a couple of progression-stopping bugs. Which, totally sensible approach, that's the smart way to go, that's the easier fix, of course, and fixing performance and stability issues, especially on PC, is not the work of a weekend or a couple of days. PC might be the very best place to game, unquestionably, but with so much variety of hardware out there and practically infinite combinations, it can be trickier than most people realize to nail down where exactly issues are, so it'll take a little time. we can at least hope that the most common causes of hard crashing and lockups and other issues will be an easy fix. I won't dig into them here, but some investigative nerdery and frankly a little bit of speculation in the community have already revealed some suspected possible issues. One of them deals with the fact the game's using an out-of-date version of direct storage, which might be hampering the game's ability to pull textures and other high-priority streaming data from SSDs at peak efficiency. That's a weird choice from Capcom. Another one has spotted, believe it or not, a typo of all things in the configuration file that might, and I press might, the reports of people trying to fix this have been very inconsistent, but it might be causing issues with the loading of correct texture resolutions under certain circumstances. Some other gamers with NVIDIA GPUs are seeing success in improving performance and presentation by manually swapping out the DLSS 3 library files for DLSS 4 ones, a trick that has been used in several games over the last year or so. And if you hadn't caught wind of it yet, the new FSR 4.0 stuff that's arriving with AMD's newest GPU release, which is happening like literally right now, is also confirmed to be arriving in Monster Hunter Wilds. For now, that will be a feature exclusive to their new architecture, so unless you have one of their newly released cards, you won't be able to use it. But AMD have said they hope to backport that functionality to the previous generation of cards, but there is no word of timing on that yet, so don't necessarily hold your breath. If I remember correctly, a similar thing happened with FSR 3, right? But of course, as I predicted before launch, and gloated about in scenery-chewing fashion a couple of days ago in a video, none of these issues seems to be making much of a dent in the enthusiasm for this game, and indeed, sales for this game. Outside of the performance and stability stuff, there is still some issues to be nailed down with the game, sort of mechanically speaking. And like the previous couple of games, we're sure to see a lot of updates refining the game, the balance, adjusting functionality of various systems, introduction of new things, and of course, the hose of content updates in the form of event quests and title updates, which will continuously expand what the game has on offer, including the introduction of new monsters to the roster. But all up, I think it's a pretty strong foundation we have here. I think we can all agree, at least all who are capable of critical thinking about this kind of stuff and not just looking for a train of screeching to jump on board so you can feel like you're part of something loud and angry, because it's 2025 and the internet has severely broken some people's whole brains irreparably, I think. Anyway, obviously, as I've been ruminating here, you've been seeing some gameplay from the ROG Ally, the game in potato mode, essentially. This is, I think, pretty much as low-end as this game will cope with. A handheld gaming PC which launched in June of 2023, making it a year and 8 months old at this point, and it has been a shockingly capable little critter. I mean, seriously, AMD's APUs have been impressing me for years now, ever since, like, what was it, the 2400G? That thing punched well above its weight, and this is sort of a descendant of that tech. The Z1 Extreme APU at its heart combines a Zen 4-based CPU, so that's the Ryzen 7000 series stuff, 6-core, 12-thread, and it also has an RDNA 3-based GPU architecture in there, with power roughly equivalent to a GTX 1650 Ti or a 1660 even, and with 16 gigabytes of RAM, but that RAM is shared with the GPU, so technically speaking, the ROG Ally does fall slightly out of the minimum recommended specs for this game. But despite that, as you can see for yourself, it is still entirely capable of reaching a playable state. And I didn't even have to turn all the settings to lowest. I mean, of course, most of the settings are at low, but a few niceties have been bumped up a little without losing playability. And we do have to lean on the most aggressive form of FSR upscaling possible. And also, in line with Capcom's published recommendations, but against my own general advice, and the advice of AMD themselves, by the way, I do have frame generation turned on. In general, I, and AMD, advise against using frame generation unless you are already getting around 60 FPS. And if you want to know why exactly that is, I have a whole video smashing this apart in detail. I'll link it in the down below for you. But in these circumstances, and knowing exactly what the sacrifice is to me, the player, and how this all works, I have chosen the extra visual fluidity over those other sacrifices. However, do keep in mind that the displayed frame rate here is effectively double what the game feels like when it comes to input responsiveness. All of that said, it is playable. It's not pretty, it is not ideal, but it is genuinely completely playable. I spent like an hour and a half playing it last night while doing these tests, even doing some of the late game tempered monsters and whatnot. The more frame-destroying areas, like the foliage and water-heavy forest, grind right up against being playable, but I largely had no issues with the hunts there. Other, simpler areas, like the arena, flow a lot nicer. So, for the curious, here's the settings I'm actually using. Maybe they'll be useful to you, even if you're not running on an ROG Ally, just to sort of figure out what you might want to tweak on your own and sort of notice the ones I haven't turned all the way down. Those are the ones that don't drag performance down significantly. So if you are running on, less than perfect and ideal hardware for this piggy of a game, maybe that'll be helpful. But thank you very much for watching. I am Blunty. I will catch you next time. Thank you to the patrons. And man, this is is truly a spectacularly fun game. I can't wait to see what becomes of it as we move forward.